Between March and June of 1953, the skies over Nevada didn't just glow, they burned. The US government detonated 11 nuclear bombs in the span of just 3 months, only 65 miles from the neon lights of Las Vegas. They called it Operation Upshot Knothole. Yeah, a name that sounds like it has nothing to do with nuclear weapons. But behind it was a spectacle of fire and radiation unlike anything the world had ever seen. It was billed as progress, a necessary step forward in national security. Yet the closer you look at this, the stranger it becomes. Each detonation turned night into day. Residents in Las Vegas described seeing a second sunrise, a flash so bright it cast shadows at midnight. Hotels and casinos began promoting atomic viewings from their rooftops. You could sip champagne and watch a giant bomb go off in the desert. It's insane. It was all presented as entertainment, something fun to go do with your kids, with your whole family. However, those people clapping, laughing, and drinking at the craps tables had no idea what invisible dust was drifting their way. The newspapers framed it as a marvel of science, a symbol of human genius. Headlines like "America leads in atomic development" filled the front pages. Footage of mushroom clouds would play before movies in theaters. Imagine that. It was a time when fear and pride were inseparable, when the line between national defense and national propaganda blurred completely. But like I said, when you peel back that optimism, a darker picture appears. Why hold tests so close to civilians? Why invite troops to see these bombs go off firsthand? And why did all the footage seem almost too cinematic, like too surreal for the time? Each of these questions cracked the surface of something much deeper. That the possibility that what happened out there in the Nevada desert wasn't just weapon testing, but human testing. Because while the official story speaks of science, precision, and national security, others suggest it was really about something else entirely. Something psychological. A study in how much fear people could endure before they broke, and how that fear could be molded into obedience. In other words, the explosions might have been real, but everything behind them might have been the true weapon. So the question remains, what were they really testing out there? The year was 1953. The Korean War was grinding to a tense stalemate. The Soviets had detonated the first atomic bomb just 4 years earlier. America needed something to prove, to its enemies and to itself, that it still ruled the atomic frontier. Out of this paranoia and pride was born Operation Upshot Knothole, the latest in a long line of nuclear tests designed to push the limits of destruction. The Nevada test site was chosen for its isolation, or at least that's what the public was told. But isolated was relative. The blast could be seen from 300 miles away. Windows shattered in small towns. Sheep grazing hundreds of miles away would die within weeks, their wool scorched and their bodies riddled with lesions. Yet, officially, the area was safe. The test site itself stretched across 1,350 square miles of desert and mountains, a land scarred by over 1,000 nuclear detonations between 1951 and 1992. During Upshot Knothole, this barren landscape became both a laboratory and a theater. Towers were erected to hold bombs aloft. Trenches were dug for soldiers. Cameras were mounted at every single angle. It was as if the desert itself was being turned into a stage for humanity's darkest science. There were 11 tests overall, each with their own codename. Annie, Nancy, Ruth, Dixie, Ray, Badger, Simon, Encore, Harry, Grabble, and Climax. Each blast served a different purpose: weapon yield studies, structural impact testing, or radiation analysis. But beneath the surface, other goals lurked, measuring how shockwaves affected people, animals, and morale. From March to June, thousands of troops, scientists, and engineers lived under the shadow of these experiments. They followed orders, filmed data, and worked in complete danger because their government told them it was safe. And as the explosions rolled across the Mojave, the line between science and spectacle grew thinner with every detonation. By the end of the operation, the Nevada desert wasn't just a testing ground, it was a graveyard for trust.
Source of energy, a boosted fission device. It was part of a development that we think will eventually give us a weapon of approximately 30 inches in diameter. 3,000 to 4,000 pounds weight and a yield in the neighborhood of 500 kilotons, around 35 times that of the Hiroshima.
The official purpose of Operation Upshot Knothole was simple: test new bomb designs, refine America's arsenal, and gather data to stay ahead of the Soviets. The government sold it as a scientific necessity, a way to ensure that no enemy could ever outmatch US power. Scientists at Los Alamos wanted lighter, compact warheads, ones that could fit inside artillery shells or small aircraft. Shot Grabble, the 10th test, achieved exactly that. A 280mm cannon fired the first and only nuclear artillery shell in human history. The footage is honestly insane. The shell arcs gracefully through the air before erupting into a massive fireball, a sun glooming over the sand. The military called it a success. Everyone now is calling it insane. Soldiers stationed just miles away were ordered to watch from trenches. Some were even instructed to walk towards the detonation site minutes after the blast. Keep in mind, these people wore standard uniforms, no protective gear whatsoever. When asked later why they were so close, the official explanation was to test troop survivability in a nuclear battlefield. That sure sounds noble, until the long-term consequences began to surface. For every test, hundreds of cameras rolled. Engineers tracked shockwaves, doctors took radiation readings, trucks full of lab-coated personnel roamed the desert collecting samples. Yet what's rarely discussed is how much of that data was classified, or how much of it was ignored to fit a narrative. To the public, these tests were just about defense. To the military, they were about dominance. But to those on the ground, the ones who felt the heat, the tremors, the nausea, it was something else entirely. A demonstration that the human body, like the desert itself, could be pushed to the brink and expected to hold.
Shot number 4, it was the first airdrop on Upshot and was detonated at approximately 6,000 feet, the highest burst of any gadget we've ever fired.
They were called the Atomic Soldiers, though most of them didn't know it at the time. Thousands of men, many barely out of high school, were stationed at Camp Desert Rock. And I know what you're thinking, Camp Desert Rock? Sounds pretty cool, right? No, you wouldn't want to be there, trust me. They were told this was training, not testing. They were told to dig trenches, to keep their heads down, and to trust their officers. When the countdown began, they huddled in the sand and the sky turned white. The sound hit next, a roar so deep it rattled through their bones. The ground rippled like water. Some men described the shockwave as being hit by a giant invisible fist. Then came the order. Stand up, face ground zero, and begin your march. The military called this Exercise Desert Rock 7. The idea was to simulate a real nuclear battlefield. Soldiers advanced towards the blast crater, some as close as 1 mile from the detonation site. They were told to inspect equipment, observe damage, and report back on combat readiness. What they didn't know is that they were walking through a haze of radiation. In the years that followed, many of these men fell ill. Leukemia, thyroid cancer, tumors. Their children were even born with deformities and birth defects. When they sought answers, they were met with silence, their records sealed, and their service denied. It wasn't until 1980, almost 30 years later, that the US government acknowledged their participation. One veteran said,
"They told us we were helping America, but I think they just wanted to see how long we'd last."
Another added,
"When that light went off, I saw through my hands. I saw my bones. I knew something wasn't right."
They were not volunteers in a scientific study. They were subjects in one. And the experiment didn't end when the last bomb went off. It continued for the rest of their lives. To some researchers, the true purpose of Operation Upshot Knothole wasn't just physical experimentation. It was psychological conditioning. In the early Cold War, the greatest weapon wasn't the bomb itself, but the fear of using it. The tests in Nevada provided the perfect stage to measure and manufacture that fear. At the time, the Atomic Energy Commission ran civil defense studies, tracking how people reacted to nuclear drills, newsreels, and public warnings. Psychologists monitored everything from heart rates to morale surveys. If a community lived near a test site, how did they behave? Did they protest or did they adapt? The results were quickly folded into early psychological warfare strategies. Meanwhile, propaganda reels painted the atomic era as hopeful. Duck and cover taught children to literally hide under their desks. Families built fallout shelters and stocked them with canned goods and tons of stuff, not realizing that they wouldn't survive a direct hit of a nuclear bomb anyways. Fear became routine, a manageable part of daily life. The tests also served another purpose: demonstrating power. To both allies and enemies, the images of mushroom clouds were haunting. America wasn't just testing bombs, it was broadcasting dominance, using fire and spectacle to keep the world in check. Then Operation Upshot Knothole wasn't just an experiment in nuclear physics, it was an experiment in social control, testing just how much terror people could live with before they questioned the hand holding the detonator. Go watch the original test footage of this operation and you cannot tell me that it doesn't look strange. Perfectly centered mushroom clouds, smooth camera pans, double exposures that make the fireballs look staged. Some shots even repeat between different test operations. It's no wonder a number of researchers, including skeptics and film analysts, have questioned the authenticity of what was shown. Every film reel that has reached the public went through government censors, and outtakes were destroyed. The surviving clips were edited to emphasize scale, symmetry, and beauty. The whole nuclear sublime. It wasn't just about data collection, it was filmmaking with a message. This is the power we have, and you should never forget it. Rumors persist that some test films use miniatures or compositing tricks to exaggerate the explosion's visual impact. Given the state of 1950s film technology, optical printing, matte layering, and high-speed photography, this wasn't possible. Whether or not that's true, the purpose was clear. Control the narrative. Make the bomb appear flawless, inevitable, and omnipotent. By the time these films reached classrooms, newsreels, and Hollywood, they'd done their job. The public no longer needed proof of nuclear devastation. They'd seen it 100 times. The image of a mushroom cloud became kind of a modern icon. And maybe that was the point. Whether the footage was real, exaggerated, or partly staged didn't matter. What mattered was that people believed enough to live in fear, to obey, and to fund a never-ending arms race. When the final bomb detonated in June 1953, the desert was forever changed. Craters scarred the land. Radioactive dust settled on everything. On sagebush, on mountains, on the skin of men who had stood too close. Scientists called the radiation low level, but the locals called it what it really was: poison. Fallout from the tests didn't stay in Nevada. It drifted across Utah, Idaho, and into the Midwest. Entire flocks of sheep died from burns and blisters. Farmers who handled contaminated feed began to fall sick. Decades later, cancer clusters would appear in those same regions, all linked back to the safe experiments in the 1950s. But perhaps the most haunting legacy was psychological. The bomb changed how people saw the world. It created an invisible fear, one that seeped into everything: movies, art, education, even dreams. The government has succeeded in making the unthinkable feel normal. To this day, much of the data from Operation Upshot Knothole remains classified. Some say it's to protect national security. Others say it's to hide the true toll: the soldiers who died in silence, the civilians who were never warned, and the generations who inherited the fallout. Operation Upshot Knothole didn't just test the limits of nuclear science. It tested the limits of human trust, in authority, in safety, and in the idea that progress always comes with a price worth paying. They blew up 11 bombs in the Nevada desert. The earth shook, the skies burned, and the world watched in awe. But maybe the real detonation wasn't really in the sand. Maybe it was in the human psyche. The Cold War wasn't just fought with weapons, it was fought with fear. Operation Upshot Knothole blurred every line between science and theater, protection and manipulation, progress and propaganda. Whether its goal was military supremacy or mass conditioning, one thing is certain: the truth was never meant to be clear. The soldiers who marched towards Ground Zero, the scientists who signed their data sheets, and the families in Las Vegas who toasted champagne under radioactive skies, all of them played a role in a story that was much bigger than they realized. A story about control and about belief. Because at the end of the day, these tests weren't just about bombs. They were about people, how easily they could be persuaded and how deeply they could be frightened, and how long they could keep trusting a system that treated them as expendable. So when you see that haunting footage, the perfect symmetrical bloom of fire and dust, remember this: it wasn't just a weapon going off, it was a message. And maybe, just maybe, we were the ones being tested all along. Alright guys, that's it for this video. Remember to drop a like down below, comment what you think about this story, and if you've heard about it yourself. Subscribe to this channel for more content. I drop a video every single Monday, guys, so remember guys, stay curious.